My boss's son fired me on his first day. He looked me in the eye, said I was too old school, and dismissed me before lunch. I didn't argue. I handed him the files, nodded once, and walked out. What he didn't realize was that decision would trigger everything. My name is Mason Clark. I worked in the same construction management firm for 24 years. Same building, same coffee machine in the break room, same office that overlooked the loading dock where deliveries came in every morning like clockwork. I wasn't a lifer because I had to be. I stayed because I believed in the work. We weren't flashy. We didn't have TikTok strategies or motivational posters about thinking outside the box, but we got buildings up, safely under budget and on schedule. That's what mattered. And I was good at it. I started there as a site coordinator. Back then, we used clipboards more than tablets. I adapted. Eventually moved into operations. Oversaw logistics, scheduling, site compliance. By year 15, most of the team came to me before making calls they weren't sure about. Not because I had a title, but because I knew the terrain, people, systems, timing. The founder, the man who built the firm, he trusted me. He never said it out loud, but you could tell. He didn't hover. He didn't need to. I got things done. Then, late last fall, he retired. No warning, no fanfare. Just an email one Thursday afternoon announcing that he was stepping down and naming his son as interim director effective immediately. The son, we'd met a few times over the years. Short greetings in the hallway during college breaks. Seemed harmless back then. Quiet. Polished in a showroom kind of way. Didn't ask questions. Always had somewhere to be. Never gave the impression he was interested in the business. So, when the founder retired, we were all caught off guard. His son came in the following Monday at 8 a.m. sharp. Clean-pressed suit, designer shoes. Shook hands with people like it was a press shoot. I kept my distance. Not in a rude way, just observant. By 9:30, he had a whiteboard brought into the main floor. Started scribbling ideas, buzzwords. Agile expansion. Real-time workflow audits. Digital asset alignment. Words that sounded important but didn't touch the ground. Then, at 11:15, I got the call to meet in his office. It wasn't the founder's office anymore. He'd remodeled it over the weekend. New desk, abstract art on the walls, some kind of glass sculpture spinning slowly behind him. "Mason," he said, flashing a practiced smile. "I appreciate your years of service." That phrase, years of service, is never followed by good news. He went on about direction, modernization, needing to refresh the operating rhythm. Then he said it. "I think you've got too much legacy thinking baked in. We need fresh eyes. And respectfully, I don't think you're the right fit for where we're going." I didn't say anything right away, not because I was shocked, but because I'd felt the shift the second he stepped in the door. Still, I asked, "Are you terminating my employment?" He didn't even blink, just said, "Today will be your last day." I nodded, got up, walked out. Didn't take anything but my jacket and a thumb drive. He didn't know what was on it. He also didn't know that the safety certification system his father and I had spent 3 years building was still run off templates I'd developed. Or that the last 6 bids we landed, worth a combined $12 million, were structured around partnerships I personally negotiated. He didn't ask. He didn't care. By 2 o'clock that day, my credentials were revoked. Email locked out, phone service cut. I was a ghost. I went home, sat on the porch, didn't call anyone, but people started calling me. First, it was Tim from compliance. He asked if I had the old risk calculation tables, said the new guy was trying to force through site approval on a bid with incomplete data. Then it was Claire from vendor relations. She said the software vendor needed sign-off on a contract renewal, but no one knew who was authorized to approve it now. Then came the texts, one after another. The plumbing subcontractor on a new hospital build texted me to say no one had shown up for a site walkthrough they scheduled 2 weeks prior. The electrical lead asked if I had backup copies of the circuit diagrams for the stadium build. I didn't respond to any of them at first, not out of spite, just discipline. I was still processing. By Friday, I got an email from my personal account. Someone had forwarded me an internal memo. The new director had announced sweeping changes, flattening management, introducing performance analytics dashboards, reallocating budget. He had also fired 3 other longtime team members, people I trusted, people who carried institutional knowledge that wasn't written anywhere. The thing about firing people who keep things running is eventually the gears seize. And they did. Week 2, the site inspection for our biggest retail build was flagged. The permit paperwork was never filed. Week 3, the bidding software glitched mid-submission for a school district project. Lost the contract. Week 4, our insurance provider dropped us. Flagged for non-compliance on 2 job sites. No one could locate the files proving otherwise. That's when the founder called me. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't emotional, just confused. "What the hell is going on over there, Mason?" I didn't know how to answer him. I hadn't spoken to him since the announcement. I said I'd heard about the changes, but I wasn't in a position to offer clarity. He sighed, said his son wasn't taking his calls. That was the first time I realized he hadn't planned any of this. He had stepped down, assuming the house would still stand. I wished him well, then hung up. Later that day, a courier showed up at my house. No note, just a company laptop in a sealed envelope and a typed message. "Please advise." I didn't plug it in. I didn't return the call from HR either. I knew what they were trying to do. But this wasn't my fire to put out anymore. They had made that clear. What they didn't know, and what would soon become very clear, was that I hadn't left empty-handed. I hadn't stolen anything. Everything I had built, from the vendor networks to the job site protocols to the actual implementation models. They were mine, drafted, developed, maintained under my own system, and none of it had been transferred. The firm's infrastructure wasn't cloud native. It ran on secure, local schemas I managed. Nobody had thought to document the dependencies. They couldn't replicate it because they didn't know what it was. By the start of month 2, bids stopped going out. Cash flow tightened, projects stalled. I got another call, this time from one of our senior clients. He didn't even mention the firm, just asked if I was taking on private consulting. I told him I'd think about it. Truth was, I'd already registered an LLC the week I was fired. Quietly, no social media, no announcement, just a name, a domain, and a separate email. By the time they called me again, this time with a formal invitation to re-engage on a contract basis, I was already speaking with 3 of their top clients directly. They weren't trying to punish the firm. They were trying to finish their jobs, and they trusted me more than whoever was sitting in that shiny new office. When the son finally called, his voice was calm, calculated, like a man trying to pretend the house wasn't burning. "Mason, I think we got off on the wrong foot," he said. "I'd like to discuss a strategic partnership moving forward." I paused, then I said, "Your world didn't collapse because you fired me. It collapsed because you never bothered to understand what held it up." Then I hung up. I didn't expect to hear from him again after that call. I had made it clear, respectfully, but finally. What I didn't say outright, and didn't need to, was that trust wasn't something you could snap in half and tape back together with a contract offer. But the messages kept coming. First through email, then through an outside consulting firm they brought in to bridge the gap. A woman I'd never met sent me a bullet-pointed proposal outlining deliverables, timelines, and projected compensation if I were willing to assist with restabilizing internal systems. They still didn't get it. This wasn't about throwing money at a hole they didn't know how to patch. This was about understanding what they'd torn out when they made that first cut. But I wasn't interested in explaining that to them anymore. Instead, I focused on what I could build from the ground up. Without them, I named my new company Clark Systems Consulting. No flair, no branding agency, just a clean white page, a secure back end, and a private list of contacts that I trusted. And I didn't go chasing work. I didn't have to. In fact, the first 3 jobs came to me through word of mouth. Quiet referrals, private conversations. Each one started the same way, someone saying they'd heard I was working independently now, and they had a project that needed someone who knew how to get things done without all the fluff. The first was a mid-rise development just outside the city. The firm originally contracted for the build had pulled out halfway through due to cash flow issues, and the real estate partners were scrambling to get back on track before investors walked. I met with the project manager over coffee. She slid a half-inch thick folder across the table, the paper inside worn at the edges. She said, "Everyone I ask tells me to call you." That's the thing about reputation. It doesn't need a billboard. I reviewed the documents that night, redlined 3 key oversights, and sent back a revised proposal by 6 a.m. The call came in by 8. Let's do it. Simple as that. We broke ground again 3 weeks later. My crew, a lean, sharp group of contractors I had worked with over the years, knew the rhythm. No games, no corporate red tape. While I was walking that site on a Tuesday morning, I got word from a former colleague. He told me the firm, the one that fired me, had missed another major deadline. A government infrastructure contract that should have brought in stable income for the next 18 months had been rescinded. Reason? Incomplete documentation, non-compliance, lack of credentialed oversight. In short, no one had any idea what they were doing. And the founder's son? Still showing up in that same pressed suit, still scribbling buzzwords on glass boards while the foundation crumbled beneath him. I felt no pleasure in it. Just a quiet confirmation of what I already knew. Running a firm isn't about vision statements or polished shoes. It's about knowing where the pressure points are. Who to call when a shipment gets stuck at port. How to read between the lines of an RFP. When to push and when to wait. He hadn't learned any of it. And worse, he didn't think he needed to. It was only a matter of time. But what surprised me was how quickly the tide turned. By month 4, Clark Systems Consulting had more work than I could personally manage. I brought on 2 former colleagues, ones who'd been let go during the streamlining phase. We kept things lean, no offices, remote coordination, weekly in-person meetings only when needed. Clients liked it. They liked not having to chase updates. They liked getting honest answers, and I liked working without politics. One afternoon, I was walking a job site, a private school campus renovation, when I spotted someone watching me from across the street. Dressed in business casual, clearly not part of the crew. I didn't think much of it until he crossed the street and introduced himself. Said he was working with my former firm's new strategic alignment team. Said they were exploring merger options and wanted to know if I was open to talks. I looked at him and asked, "Are you here as an employee or as a scout?" He hesitated, said he was just exploring. I nodded once and said, "Then you can keep exploring." I'm not for sale. The truth was, The thought of going back, even in a different capacity, made something in my gut tighten. Too much had changed, and it wasn't about holding a grudge. I don't operate that way, but there are certain lines that once crossed don't get uncrossed. Firing me the way they did wasn't just a personnel decision. It was a declaration that they valued trend chasing over experience, ego over execution, and the consequences of that had finally caught up. Around month 5, I heard from a supplier I'd worked with for over a decade. He mentioned offhand that the firm had defaulted on a payment for materials on a job that never got off the ground. Said they were trying to renegotiate terms, but the suppliers had started pulling out. He said, "Everyone's watching now." No one wants to be the last one holding unpaid invoices. And just like that, the network they depended on, vendors, subs, even the cleaning crews, started to peel away. By the time they issued a press release announcing a temporary restructure to focus on core competencies, it was already over. The collapse wasn't loud. It didn't come with headlines or lawsuits. It came with silence, unanswered calls, locked doors, missed deliveries. People just stopped showing up. And the son? I don't know. He disappeared from the industry circles, deleted his professional profile. Some said he went back to school. Others said he left the country. But by then, I was too deep in the work to pay attention. We had just signed a contract for a new municipal complex, and I was flying out to coordinate the first planning session. It felt different. This time, I wasn't reporting to someone else's vision. I was building it. That flight, I remember, was the first time in months I sat back and actually breathed. No emails, no cleanup, just motion, forward. That's what happens when you stop fighting for a seat at someone else's table and build your own instead. And the irony, the firm I gave 2 decades to, the one that fired me without hesitation, had become a cautionary tale whispered over drinks at industry mixers. Not out of cruelty, but as a reminder. A reminder that experience isn't a relic, that loyalty has value, that there are people who know how to carry a business forward not because of a flashy resume, but because they've been in the trenches, made the hard calls, fixed what broke, and kept the lights on. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I don't need it. I tell it because it matters. Because maybe the next time someone walks into a company on their first day, full of ambition and theory, they'll stop and listen before they make their first move. And maybe, just maybe, they'll realize that the quiet guy in the corner office isn't just old school. He's the reason the building's still standing. By the time we closed out the municipal complex project, Clark Systems had become something I hadn't dared to imagine when I walked out of that office on my last day. Stable, quiet, respected. Not flashy, not fast-growing, but deeply rooted in one principle. We knew what we were doing, and we only took work we believed in. The irony didn't escape me. I had been fired for lacking modern alignment, for not adapting fast enough. But that slowness, that deliberateness, turned out to be our greatest strength. We didn't chase contracts. We didn't outbid to underdeliver. We simply showed up, did the work, and did it right. And the industry noticed. I remember the exact moment I knew something had shifted. I was walking into a planning session for a courthouse project. Tight security, big budget, lots of politics. As I passed through the metal detectors, one of the county officials looked up from his badge list and said, "You're Clark?" I nodded. He smiled and said, "Glad you're on this. We've had too many talkers. We need a builder." That word stuck with me, not a visionary, not a consultant. A builder. That's what I'd always been, quietly, steadily. Not long after that, a letter arrived at my office. No envelope. Just a tri-folded document with a name I hadn't heard in almost a year. The founder of my old firm, the father. He wasn't writing to argue, or even explain. He was apologizing. It was handwritten, simple. 3 paragraphs. He said he hadn't realized how far things had spiraled until it was too late. Said he had stepped back from business entirely, retired early, moved out of the city, but there was one line in the middle of the letter that caught me. I thought I was giving my son a gift. Turns out I handed him a fire I didn't know how to contain. I didn't reply, not because I was bitter, but because I didn't need anything from him anymore. Closure, for me, hadn't come from an apology. It had come from quiet progress, from the satisfaction of knowing I'd stayed true to my way, even when it cost me everything. But the real surprise came 6 months later. I was asked to speak at a regional infrastructure forum, the kind of event I used to avoid. I didn't like microphones or spotlight stages, but one of the organizing directors, someone I'd worked with on a disaster recovery project, insisted I share what we'd learned about risk mitigation and workforce stability. So I said yes. When I got up to the podium, I didn't prepare a deck. No slides, just notes and stories. I talked about what happens when companies chase trends instead of results, when they trade seasoned staff for spreadsheets and slogans, when they forget that behind every blueprint is a builder, and behind every builder is a history. I spoke for 25 minutes. No applause breaks, no big punchlines, just steady, honest reflection. And when I stepped down, something happened I didn't expect. People came up, quietly, shook my hand, thanked me, not because the speech was inspiring, but because it was real. One man, an architect from out of state, said, "I've watched 3 companies collapse the same way you described. It's like you were in the room with them." I wasn't surprised. It's always the same signs. You ignore the people who know the weight of your structure, and eventually it folds. By that time, Clark Systems had grown to a 6-person operation, still no corporate office. We worked out of a converted space behind a materials yard. We had a fridge, a coffee pot, and a whiteboard. That was enough. The best part? I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to wear suits to justify experience. I didn't have to speak in jargon to prove I understood problems. I was finally working in a way that made sense, honest, focused, and rooted in what actually mattered. And then, one morning, something happened that brought it all full circle. I got a call from a junior engineer I'd mentored years ago. He had just left the very firm that fired me. Said they were still trying to rebrand, rebuild, recover. But morale was gone, no direction, no trust. He said, "You know, they still use your original system layouts. They haven't been able to improve on them." I laughed, not out of pride, just out of the absurdity of it all. They had fired the architect of their foundation, and were still living in the house he designed. But here's the truth most people miss. Success doesn't roar. It doesn't come with headlines or champagne or standing ovations. Sometimes success is just the quiet click of a door closing behind you, and the certainty that you'll never walk back through it again. Sometimes success is turning down the contract that would have paid triple because you know it comes with strings. Sometimes it's being able to pick your clients, your hours, your team. Sometimes it's being able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, "I did it my way and it worked." That's where I am now. I don't carry bitterness. I don't replay that final meeting. I don't check in on their numbers. I building, I solve, I teach. And at the end of every project, when the last inspection clears and the client shakes my hand, I know this. The son may have had the power to fire me, but I had something he never did. Respect earned over time. A track record that spoke louder than any pitch deck, and a legacy built not on theory, but on sweat, decisions, and staying long after others walked away. He fired me on his first day. And that was the day his world began to crack. Not because of me, because of what he dismissed too quickly. And in the end, that's the difference between inheriting power and earning it.